Good evening. The First Minister says fundamental issues about Scotland's future have been raised by the Supreme Court's ruling that Holyrood doesn't need to be consulted ahead of Brexit. The court found that MPs should have a say on triggering Article 50, but ministers weren't legally compelled to seek approval from the devolved administrations. Well, in a moment, we'll ask whether this ruling takes us closer to a second independence referendum. But first, let's go to Westminster, where our correspondent Nick Ardley has been following the day's events. Nick.
Jackie, this was a landmark constitutional case. It went to the heart of the relationship between different parts of the UK, what the UK government can do, what they need the backing of the Parliament behind me to do, and what legal role Scotland plays within that. Tonight, that's all a bit clearer. Time to find out who has the power to fire the starting gun on Brexit. This morning, all eyes were on the Supreme Court as it delivered a landmark ruling on the legal basis for triggering Article 50.
By a majority of 8-3, the Supreme Court rules that the government cannot trigger Article 50 without an Act of Parliament authorising it to do so. On the devolution issues, the Court unanimously rules that UK ministers are not legally compelled to consult the devolved legislatures before triggering Article 50.
This case was never about whether Brexit happens, but how. And now that the judges have delivered their verdict, this returns to the political realm.
The Prime Minister set out last week a path towards the hardest of hard Brexits. I don't believe there's a majority for that in the House of Commons. I certainly don't believe there's a majority for that across the country. So this is an opportunity for the House of Commons to assert itself and to have a say not just on the narrow question, but on the broader terms of negotiation as well.
The Scottish Parliament will still vote on Article 50. Political pressure still matters. But legally, it will be in Westminster that ministers have to win. The government had been preparing legislation in expectation it would lose at the Supreme Court. That was announced within hours of the judgment.
We will, within days, introduce legislation to give the government the legal power to trigger Article 50 and begin the formal process of withdrawal.
But other parties won't make that simple. The SNP wants unanimous agreement from devolved governments. Without that, it'll vote against Article 50. Scotland's Labour MP says he's prepared to vote against the government too, but the Labour leader says his party will
support Article 50 being triggered. We've made that very, very clear. That is the result of the referendum, and we have to respect that. It doesn't mean we abdicate the field. It means that we then hold the government to account on the issues of trade, the issues of rights, and the issues of the long-term direction in which this country wants to go.
His support means the Commons will almost certainly back starting the process. But with the Lib Dems likely to vote against too, that could mean just one of Scotland's MPs backs triggering Article 50.
Whatever the legalities, we want to work with the Scottish Government because I believe the people of Scotland want the two governments to work together and get on with ensuring that we can negotiate with the 27 other countries that best possible deal for leaving the EU.
The UK government now hopes it can get approval to start the process, and quickly. The legal questions over Article 50 are over. It's back to politics. And that politics continues this week. It's expected on Thursday that the government will publish the legislation it hopes will allow it to trigger Article 50. It then hopes that it can get that through the House of Commons within a fortnight. But as we've heard, there will be amendments. The SNP alone say they could table up to 50. Labour and the SNP agree the UK government needs to provide more detail. And whatever happens in the building behind me, the tensions between the Scottish government and the UK government over Brexit show no signs of abating. We're still at the start of the process of finding out what the ramifications of the Brexit vote are and what the future holds.
Thank you very much, Nick. Well, let's turn to the Scottish Government. And the First Minister has repeatedly warned that a second independence referendum is now very likely. But how likely is very likely? Andrew Black has been trying to find out.
Just before the last Holyrood election, Nicola Sturgeon revealed what it might take to call a second independence referendum.
Like what?
Well, you know, I don't know. Perhaps if the Tories wanted to drag us out of the European Union against our will, for example.
And after most of Scotland voted to stay in the EU, the First Minister said this.
Well, I think an independence referendum is now highly likely.
Ms Sturgeon then said that staying in the single market would remove the short-term prospect of IndyRef 2.
And what I've said is if we can find a way of protecting Scotland's economic interests, of protecting our democratic interests within the UK, then I'm up for trying to do that. I've put forward proposals.
Taking independence off the table for the short term.
In terms of the timescale of Brexit, that's what I've been very clear about.
When the PM ruled it out, the FM hit back.
Does it make a second independence referendum all but inevitable?
Well, I think that is very likely the case.
So why likely and not definitely?
The SNP never wanted a referendum under these circumstances, because if Scotland becomes independent in Europe, the rest of the UK is outside Europe. You've got a single market, a European hard boundary between England and Scotland, which we wouldn't have had last time. So they wanted a referendum with both countries being inside the EU. That's why they're very hesitant. And of course the polls are showing support for independence pretty much where it was in 2014.
So what about today?
I have made very clear that that option is very, very much on the table, and as I've said before, I think with every day that passes right now, it's becoming clearer that Scotland's voice cannot and is not able to be heard within the UK on this question.
Nicola Sturgeon says she'll never give up on independence in the long term. The question of when we might get another referendum remains unanswered. Andrew Black, reporting Scotland.
Well, our political editor Brian Taylor is at Holyrood for us this evening. Brian, why doesn't Nicola Sturgeon call an independence referendum now?
Because she fears she might lose, Jackie. As I've said a number of times, Nicola Sturgeon doesn't want to hold a referendum, she wants to win one, and these are not particularly propitious circumstances nor the time of her choosing. So if she is to hold a referendum, and I think she will, then there has to be preparing the ground beforehand. I think she wants to do several things. First of all, she is genuinely seeking in discussions with the UK government to get concessions towards Scotland's interests as she sees them. Secondly, she wants to prolong those discussions in order to enable the ground to be laid. But thirdly, if there is to be a referendum, she wants to be able to say to the British people, look, the Scottish people, look, I did absolutely everything in my power to try and strike a deal within the ambit of the UK, and it proved impossible. In other words, she wants to set the grounding for that referendum if and when it occurs.
So how long can she hold off? Is there a time limit?
There's not a strict time limit. Again, I stress this is not the time she would have chosen had things been other than they are. But as a popular beat combo once reminded us, you can't always get what you want. I think that she will try and follow a timetable, if there is to be a referendum, that parallels Brexit to some extent. She will want the nature of Brexit to be beginning to emerge from those discussions between the UK government and the European Union, the picture of Brexit, the shape, if you like, to be beginning to emerge from the Stygian gloom. And she'll be able, therefore, to contrast that and counterbalance that with the offer of independence. I think that points, if there is to be a referendum, I think that points to 2018. A number on the SNP side, Alex Salmond, Angus Brendan McNeill have said today that they think autumn 2018 is likely, because by then you get the beginnings of the picture of what Brexit will look like, but it's not too late, perhaps, not too late perhaps, for an alternative offer to be put to the Scottish people whereby perhaps they could stay within the European Union. If you ask me simply, do today's events bring a referendum closer? The answer is yes.
Brian Taylor, thank you.